The Clean Power Hour is brought to you by CPS America, the maker of North America's #1 three-phase string inverter, with over 6 gigawatts shipped in the U.S. The CPS America product lineup includes three-phase string inverters ranging from 25 to 275 kW. Their flagship inverter, the CPS 250-275, is designed to work with solar plants ranging from 2 megawatts to 2 gigawatts. The 250-275 pairs well with CPS America's exceptional data communication, controls, and energy storage solutions. Go to chintpowersystems.com to find out more.
We're hearing a little bit of this boomerang effect, though, where the kids are saying, we're interested in farming. If solar's part of that and it's a part of a revenue diversification, I'm interested. If that means we have to change practices as a farm, I could do that. They're less sort of entrenched in the old ways. So maybe they get into sheep, right? Maybe they're interested in adopting the equipment. That's a generational shift. And they're also more climate aware. And so we're hearing about folks saying, I want to farm because it's actually a climate solution. And I'm really interested in agrivoltaics because it looks like it's solving for a few things at once. And it gives me, both revenue, it's a climate solution I could be a part of, and I get to keep, involved with the family farm.
Are you speeding the energy transition? Here at the Clean Power Hour, our hosts Tim Montague and John Weaver bring you the best in solar, batteries, and clean technologies every week. Want to go deeper into decarbonization? We do too. We're here to help you understand and command the commercial, residential, and utility solar, wind, and storage industries. So let's get to it. Together we can speed the energy transition.
We're here at the Solar Farm Summit. My guest today is Ethan Winter and Austin Kinzer with the American Farmland Trust. American Farmland Trust, or AFT as it's known, has a long legacy in the United States helping rural communities. But we're at the Agrivoltaics conference, so we are going to really dig into how dual-use solar can be a benefit to rural communities and farming communities in the United States. So why don't you both briefly introduce yourselves for my audience, and then we'll dive into the topic.
Great. Well, thank you for having us, Tim. American Farmland Trust is a 40-year-old organization that has protected millions of acres of farmland across the country. We understand that solar represents a major new land use for rural areas. So it was naturally for us to get involved. And we've been working on our Smart Solar program for about 5 years now, and we're really ramping up. This year's Solar Farm Summit is a great opportunity for us to be highlighting the platforms and the services that we're developing.
Great. And Austin?
Pleasure to be here. Thank you for having us, Tim. Yeah, excited to sponsor this event, bring together all of these leaders in ag, solar industry, academia for exactly what we're talking about. How can we make solar work for farmers?
Yes. You mentioned the Solar Smart or the Smart Solar program. Tell us what that is.
Yeah, so Smart Solar for us is a set of principles that guide and articulate our work in this space. We believe that America can have both an acceleration of this clean energy transition and thriving, resilient farms. That means that we're safeguarding soils, prioritizing solar on buildings and land not well suited for agriculture, growing agrivoltaics, and supporting farm viability and equity in this transition. Those are the 4 corners of our Smart Solar principles. And then around that, we're developing programs, supporting policy, and supporting projects, actually getting into development and collaboration with developers to see how far we can push the agrivoltaics piece.
Okay. Yeah, I know enough to be dangerous about solar development, and there's some nooks and crannies here that I really like to dig into a little bit, because it is very easy on the surface to say, look, we should use subprime farm ground. We shouldn't use prime farm ground. For example, I live in Champaign County, Illinois, some of the very best farm ground in the United States. A corn and bean farmer can make maybe $300 an acre farming corn. A solar farmer will pay them $900 an acre to convert that land to solar farm. And of course, that solar farm can be dual use or multi-use, so it's not just flipping a switch. But it's hard to convince developers to go after subprime ground, because in central Illinois, Subprime ground means wetland, generally speaking. Illinois was a giant wet prairie, pre-European settlement, right? I don't think any energy professional argues that we should try to use subprime farm ground, for example. The reality is very different. Just because you don't want your solar farm to flood, things like that. And I don't know if AFT has an answer to that conundrum or not.
We look for this lens of understanding farmland nationally as our basic baseline. This is really where AFT has cut its teeth in understanding the trajectory of farmland loss over decades. And that's under our Farms Under Threat analysis. That looked at conversion trends from about 2001 to 2016. Not surprisingly, most of that conversion is suburbanization. We heard that this morning. It's not due to solar in that time frame. We did another analysis projecting what would farmland loss look like nationally and at different state levels based on those trends, looking at 3 different scenarios: a business as usual scenario, a runaway sprawl scenario, and a compact cities smart growth scenario. And what we found is a business as usual scenario would suggest another 18 million acres of farmland conversion by 2040. And some states would see significant farmland loss. States like New Jersey, Massachusetts could see over 15% of their remaining farmland lost in the next 20 years.
Because of urban sprawl.
Urban sprawl.
Yeah.
The classic drivers. So what's interesting now is you have this additional, very complex and nuanced land use that is solar. And it may not have additive effects or it may accelerate those effects. So we're not necessarily saying you can't develop on prime farmland. What we're saying is let's really understand this new land use of solar as it's accelerating, understand how it can cut in different directions, and if it's going to be on really productive prime farmland, where farmers are interested in staying in farming. How do we make that happen? And agrivoltaics seems to be really an elegant solution, but as you said, it's much more complicated than the buzzwords. Yeah. And that's why we brought on Austin. We realized that, again, building on AFT's expertise in soil health, policy, land access, we needed expertise in energy systems. How you put solar together, how do you analyze the economics of these projects? And that's why we brought on Austin Kinzer, who had been at the National Renewable Energy Lab, has a background in advanced energy systems. And we're analyzing the possibilities there.
And I'm fully supportive of, rules like in New Jersey where you can't do greenfield solar anymore, right, at utility scale, unless it's dual use. Farmland is, a very limited resource in a state like New Jersey, which is very small, and that's as it should be, right? We still want an agricultural economy in places like New Jersey. Jersey is also one of the great solar states. But let's talk about dual use. What is your message, I guess, for rural communities? I think it's a harder sell to rural Americans than it is to energy developers. It's a both end, because it is a change. If energy developers have been doing traditional, just planting a ground cover and then mowing that, right? They're not used to the concept of cropping or grazing their solar fields. That's coming now. It's becoming more known, and the O&M costs, it's been determined from what I'm hearing, if you're grazing your sites, you're reducing your vegetation control by up to 25%. So that's a win-win. But what is your message to rural communities?
My message to rural communities is this is a huge opportunity to participate in the clean energy transition. The benefits of agrivoltaics can support existing agricultural economies. They can make farms more resilient. They can allow farmers to support the rest of their operation. You don't need to lease your entire land to a developer. You can lease one of your less productive fields, and that can support the rest of your farm operations. So this is a huge opportunity, and we're working to make sure that this is done right and done in a way that farmers actually see the benefits of this.
I mean, I'm aware of this phenomenon in rural America that it's hard for farmers to keep the next generation on the land. The younger generation is migrating to cities en masse, and this seems like an important economic lifeline for rural communities to add this additional stream of income basically into their operations and augment. I don't want them to stop farming, but I don't want to stop the energy transition at the same time. I think it's a win-win. But what is your experience around the country working with rural communities? Because as we were discussing in the pre-show, there is a phenomenon, NIMBYism in the United States, a growing drumbeat. Developers are having to spend more time and more money getting their projects permitted. And there is dark money flowing into this pushback, which I call fear, uncertainty, and doubt, right? People oftentimes don't know what solar is. And the fossil fuel industry has a vested interest in creating friction for us. But what is your experience? Either of you.
Want to talk about the surveys?
Yeah, we've been traveling across the state of Colorado the last 6 months or so, talking to rural communities, hosting roundtables, buying them a meal, talking to farmers, get about a half dozen of them in a room. And, there is definitely some of that pushback. I think, some of it is from misinformation. I think at the end of the day, people don't want to see change in their communities that they've known. I think the average farmer's been farming the same land for, over a decade at least, in Colorado. And yeah, people don't want to see that change. And I think solar developers discount the land area. They say, okay, it's only 1% of farmland, what we would need for clean energy goals. Now, the problem with that argument is that it doesn't take into account the fact that it's very concentrated, because interconnection is such a huge constraint on solar development. So developers are targeting specific communities, and if you're a landowner in one of those communities, because you've had mailers, you've had emails, you've had a dozen solar developers knocking on your door trying to get you to lease land. So the effects are very concentrated, which is why we're seeing this huge pushback. And it does take a massive toll on an ag economy if you're going to take 15% of the land out of production. What does that do to the service providers, who are selling seed and fertilizer and services to farmers? I don't think solar developers give enough thought to what are the actual long-term ramifications for these communities.
I could add to that a little bit. This morning we heard from Dr. Rebecca Jones-Albertus from the Solar Energy Technologies Office. Yeah. And one of the real takeaways from her during the listening sessions that DOE and USDA convened in January, the first time they've ever done a multi-day series of listening sessions on clean energy on American farmland, was the issue of tenant farmers. 40% of farmers in the U.S. depend on land they don't own, often with a handshake, annual agreement in order to operate. And in states like New York, it's closer to 70%. And this is an issue that just wasn't really on the radar for a lot of for developers, but it's existential, especially for small and mid-sized producers who are not going to be able to compete for additional acreage as land gets more expensive. So this is, again, where agrivoltaics sends an opportunity in. We see generationally, there is a gap. I think we talked about Colorado. We did a survey in Connecticut. We've just done one in Virginia. And we're starting to compare the results of these different state-level surveys where we're asking producers about their attitudes around solar. What do they think about solar on farmland? Where are their concerns? Are they interested in agrivoltaics? And importantly, who do they trust as channels for information, messengers? And typically, and this may be not a surprise, farmers are trusting farmers, farm associations, a lot more than they're trusting solar developers and utilities. Yeah. What we're hearing also is that developers, they're talking to the landowner, but again, there's a blind spot with who else is dependent on that land. And those are the folks who show up at the meetings because they're worried about losing access to support their business. So agrivoltaics plays a really important role. We're still parsing out some of the survey data. I'm picking up a bit of an interesting generational difference where older farmers are thinking this is an economic opportunity to lease, and they're wrestling with this. This is a really hard decision. They don't want to do something that is going to impair the ability of their kids to farm in the future. If the kids aren't in the story anymore, then that's a pretty easy sell to lease the farm. We're hearing a little bit of this boomerang effect, though, where the kids are saying, we're interested in farming. If solar is part of that and it's a part of a revenue diversification, I'm interested. If that means we have to change practices as a farm, I could do that. They're less sort of entrenched in the old ways. So maybe they get into sheep, right? Maybe they're interested in adopting the equipment. That's a generational shift. And they're also more climate aware. And so we're hearing about folks saying, I want to farm because it's actually a climate solution. And I'm really interested in agrivoltaics because it looks like it's solving for a few things at once. And it gives me, both revenue, it's a climate solution I could be a part of, and I get to keep, involved with the family farm. So there's a generational piece to this. But again, who do the farmers trust in this process? It's not the folks who are sending the mail and the solicitation. So we have a knowledge gap and a trust gap that we have to overcome. And one reason why we're all here at the summit is to really highlight the importance of rigorous standards around this. A strong definition for agrivoltaics. That means not all projects are going to qualify. If you're going to have an incentive structure for agrivoltaics, there's a certain bar you need to reach. Then that incentive should help address those additional costs and risk factors to make it worthwhile. And that means some projects are not going to be agrivoltaic. And we understand that. We're not suggesting that this is a all or nothing proposition, but we think that it could make a big difference in building more support for solar in rural communities, especially where that next generation is interested in being part of that.
And do we have, because I totally resonate with that message, that this is a very important marketing message for the clean energy industry, that you can do dual use. You can still run animals or grow crops on this land that is also solar farms. But do we have any hard evidence that this is helping rural communities become more accepting of solar development?
There's a great study from, I believe it's Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, which they sent out surveys to folks who live within 3 miles of a solar array to understand what do they feel about this? How do they feel about this project? And what we saw in the data is that agrivoltaics is much more broadly supported than greenfield sites and even than brownfield sites. There's more positive attitudes towards agrivoltaic sites. So when we're talking about community opposition, which is one of the top 3 barriers to solar development, is local opposition.
Yeah.
And this is a way that communities view solar more favorably is through agrivoltaics. Now, we need to be careful with that, because what we don't want to see is this tokenization of agriculture. Mm-hmm. We call this farm washing. Mm-hmm. New vocab term for listeners.
Agrivoltaics.
Yeah.
We're seeing agrivoltaics that go on here.
Right. We don't want to see projects where they set aside, a small corner and they're like, hey, we graze some sheep over in this corner. We're calling this agrivoltaics. No, we want to see production agriculture. Mm-hmm. If we're going to say we're keeping this land in production, we need to take that seriously. That needs to be genuine, good faith effort by developers to enable that.
I'd say it's still not totally proven how this is going to be resonant with rural communities, but the fact that you have Iowa State, Ohio State, UC Davis, Cornell, Rutgers, I could go on. All the land grants that are really kind of intersecting on this see this as a major, area of focus for the future. Yeah. And they're looking quite seriously at the social science around agrivoltaics. So they're not just looking at, does the technology work, or what are the policy levers, but what is the social acceptance? What are the pathways, again, for communicating knowledge? Mm-hmm. How does one farmer transfer insights to another farmer around this? What kind of demonstration projects are going to help farmers build expertise and trust in this? And that's an area that AFT has been working on for years around regenerative ag practices. So we're able to bring that framework of, often the pretty small farmer to farmer, or peer to peer networking to bear in terms of, this knowledge transfer. And that's how this is going to happen. This is going to be maybe slower than the developer community wants. This is not some giant switch that we flip overnight. We are going to take some time to make sure we're building pockets of trust that can expand. That's how we had no-till and cover cropping, rotational grazing become more popular with farmers, is, again, this process of farmer-to-farmer adoption with broader, level funding. But it wasn't just an overnight success. We have a project right now with Rutgers University that's been funded with the Department of Energy's Farms program. And we're developing a curriculum around agrivoltaics for New Jersey farmers. New Jersey, I think, is an interesting test case because it is land constrained. It's at the top of our list for states in terms of farmland loss due to those commercial, urban development. They've developed a pilot program for dual use that's still, it hasn't been released yet, but soon. Will be a 200 megawatt 3-year pilot program. Then they have the research at Rutgers where they're doing field trials. And we have our curriculum for the farmer training. Those are the 3 legs of a really useful triangle where you have, again, a market space, a research angle, and a workforce development or technical assistance piece that rounds it out. And that's how you're going to build more social acceptance over time, is having those 3 legs iterating over time.
The Clean Power Hour is brought to you by CPS America, the maker of North America's #1 3-phase string inverter, with over 6 gigawatts shipped in the U.S. The CPS America product lineup includes 3-phase string inverters ranging from 25 to 275 kW. Their flagship inverter, the CPS 250-275, is designed to work with solar plants ranging from 2 megawatts to 2 gigawatts. The 250-275 pairs well with CPS America's exceptional data communication, controls, and energy storage solutions. Go to chintpowersystems.com to find out more.
It makes me think, that today we have ag extension programs. I mean, I live in Champaign, Illinois, home of the University of Illinois, who's also here with an agrivoltaics project. But is there a possibility that ag extensions are going to become agrivoltaics extensions?
I think we're likely to see them building out expertise in this area. That doesn't mean that they don't do other things, of course. You're still going to have commodity ag. You're still going to have large scale, probably pretty conventional solar in certain cases. But what we're seeing is real interest in faculty and in extension agents in this area. But they need good information to build on. And that's what we've been doing is identifying opportunities to work with extension folks who are getting some traction in this. Colorado is a good example where we've been working with Colorado State Extension and our survey. Colorado just last year, very first round of funding for R&D in agrivoltaics. Is approved through the legislature. Governor was very enthusiastic. It was a very modest level of funding, $500,000. Totally oversubscribed in the first year, right? But this is how you get the ball rolling: is create a sandbox. Create a market space, let the industry get some experience, bring in extension. AFT's been playing a key role in convening, and then iterate from there, rather than thinking you're going to have a grand solution that's, at all scales right off the bat. And Colorado is a good example, too, because of the water angle. West of the Mississippi, water becomes a much bigger issue in terms of land viability. And what is the intersectionality of agrivoltaics and water conservation? You talked to Dr. Baron Gafford just recently. This issue of water conservation is going to be paramount in the future. And we're hearing from a lot of farmers who are saying, I don't have water now at all. You're in California, you got to repurpose that land. If I can do some kind of solar that allows me to get back into agriculture, that's really interesting. So this is going to be highly contextualized, Tim, in terms of different states and different regions. And it is going to take, some time in terms of getting the demonstrations up and ready.
I'm curious, in your work over the decades with farmers, you mentioned these two things, the trust gap and the knowledge gap. And so when it comes to getting farmers to embrace change, different ag practices, for example, to reduce runoff, to reduce soil erosion, to reduce carbon loss from soil, does the AFT become a trusted ally by farmers? Do they see you as one of them?
Yeah, to a degree. I see, well, first of all, AFT is built on farmers, and we have many farmers on our staff. So,
Yeah.
full stop. Yes, we are farmers. So, in that respect, the organization is seen that way. Where we're doing a ton of work right now is implementing conservation practices on behalf of NRCS, USDA's Natural Resource Conservation Service, where we have, dozens of implementation specialists whose job is to help farmers figure out how they can integrate these conservation practices to improve soil health, cover cropping, rotational grazing, how they can integrate that into their operation and get funding from the government to do that. So that's our bread and butter, is working on the ground with farmers, helping them figure out how to implement something new.
But just to add to Austin, they trust us because we were on the ground with them, providing that advice and the services, and we've been doing that for some time.
Yeah.
I think we have to be careful, that we're seen as, working with industry, not for industry. We have a corporate sponsorship program that really helps drive our program forward. It gives us access to some of the leading developers in the country, but we are not rubber stamping their projects. We don't get in front of the planning boards and say, you sponsor us, we like this project. We've made that very clear to our sponsors that you're investing in smart solar because AFT needs to be at the table, because we're a trusted voice for farmers. We don't speak for all farmers, but we're very much a respected voice across the country. And our smart solar sponsors understand that us being at the table, understanding the developers' issues as well as the farmer issues, is a critical service and role for us to play. And us being the title sponsor of this conference is a bold move for us. We're putting a big bullseye on AFT, but that's how we've operated in the past. We have this history of being able to bring in sometimes divergent communities that may be, at conflict and finding a middle ground. And we did that, at our founding. We've done that as we've been expanding regenerative practices. Smart Solar is kind of the next chapter in that work. And I don't think there's any turning back at this point. I think if you look at other countries that have instituted agrivoltaics as a national policy, yes, there's bumps in the road, and that needs to be calibrated properly. But we're seeing a real signal across the world. Austin was presenting at the Agrivoltaics World Conference last month in Denver. And there were 20 or 30 countries in the room talking about the research, the applications, farmer acceptance, and that's coming here in the U.S. I think what's exciting about the U.S. is there's such a strong spirit of entrepreneurism in the clean energy sector, and you know it very well, Tim.
Yep.
And we're seeing that energy in agrivoltaics now. Folks are saying, we can do this. This is not boutique. You've got Silicon Ranch, you've got Light Source BP, you've big operators. RWE is here.
Yep. Enel. I heard about a 2 gigawatt project.
Serious money, serious investors. They have to do this in a way that doesn't add cost. But they also know that they need to build and sustain their social license to operate. And doing that well is going to be, really important. Another part of this is the energy buyer side. Who are we producing energy for? And we're starting to hear more from, for example, at the Clean Energy Buyers Institute, more interest from corporate energy buyers in agrivoltaics because they want those social and environmental attributes in the energy they're buying. And they may be willing to pay for it. That's a strong signal because now you're not just a developer wondering, how you're going to pay for this. You're actually getting companies who are saying, this is a value to us and our shareholders that we're getting the right kind of clean energy. So we're starting to see some real convergence there.
So in our last minute together, what is the status of agrivoltaics as you all see it? What % of solar projects in the United States are considering or actually doing agrivoltaics, and where is that going?
So how many gigawatts of solar do we have in the U.S.? Some 100 gigawatts plus?
140, something like that.
I think we've got, low tens of gigawatts of solar sheep grazing today. I think somewhere around 12 gigawatts, give or take. So roughly 10% of solar sites in the U.S. are
That would have been my
already doing
guess.
some
10%.
form of this.
Yeah.
Now, if you look at the breakdown of agrivoltaics today, 99% of it is sheep grazing by capacity. So crop production hasn't really taken off yet, but I think as we see the ag industry start to get more comfortable with it, we see new machinery that's better suited for this application, and we see broader social acceptance of it, I think we will see that start to take off more specifically on the crop production side, because there are these benefits for resilience to drought and potentially improved yields for certain crops, certain locations. So there's going up and to the right.
Yeah.
And Tim, I also mentioned there, just back of my hand, I think there's at least 10 states right now that have active funding for agricultural dual use. It's from the state of Washington to NYSERDA in New York has just launched a $5 million R&D program. Applications are due in September. That's a big deal for a big energy state office like that. I mentioned New Jersey earlier. A year ago, I could have counted on 3 or 4 fingers how many states were doing programs. Now it's 10. It may be 20 next year. So we're going to start to see more innovation at the state level. And meanwhile, we hope that the federal government will continue to stay focused on this. With the politics in our country right now, we're going to need to future-proof this work. This energy transition is going to depend on support from rural communities, perhaps even more so in the future. And that's why we're so focused on doing this right.
Well, I want to thank Ethan and Austin with the American Farmland Trust for being with me today here at the Solar Farm Summit. Please check out all of our content at cleanpowerhour.com. Give us a rating and a review on Apple and Spotify. Please connect with me on LinkedIn and tell a friend about the show. I'm Tim Montague. Let's grow agrivoltaics.
Hey, listeners. This is Tim. I want to give a shout out to all of you. I do this for you twice a week. Thank you for being here. Thank you for giving us your time. I really appreciate you and what you're all about. You are part and parcel of the energy transition, whether you're an energy professional today or an aspiring energy professional. So thank you. I want to let you know that the Clean Power Hour has launched a listener survey, and it would mean so much to me if you would go to cleanpowerhour.com, click on the About Us link right there on the main navigation. That takes you to the About page, and you'll see a big graphic, Listener Survey. Just click on that graphic, and it takes just a couple of minutes. If you fill out the survey, I will send you a lovely baseball cap with our logo on it. The other thing I want our listeners to know is that this podcast is made possible by corporate sponsors. We have Chin Power Systems, the leading three-phase string inverter manufacturer in North America. So check out CPS America. But we are very actively looking for additional support to make this show work. And you see here our media kit with all the sponsor benefits and statistics about the show. We're dropping 2 episodes a week. We have now over 320,000 downloads on YouTube, and we're getting about 45,000 downloads per month. So this is a great way to bring your brand to our listeners, and our listeners are decision makers in clean energy. This includes project executives, engineers, finance, project management, and many other professionals who are making decisions about and developing, designing, installing, and making possible clean energy projects. So check out cleanpowerhour.com, both our listener survey on the About Us and our media kit, and become a sponsor today. Thank you so much. Let's grow solar and storage. The Clean Power Hour is brought to you by CPS America, the maker of North America's #1 three-phase string inverter, with over 6 gigawatts shipped in the U.S. The CPS America product lineup includes three-phase string inverters ranging from 25 to 275 kW. Their flagship inverter, the CPS 250-275, is designed to work with solar plants ranging from 2 megawatts to 2 gigawatts. The 250-275 pairs well with CPS America's exceptional data communication, controls, and energy storage solutions. Go to chinpowersystems.com to find out more.